I was in disbelief when I asked my wife to dance at the company party and she said, with a coldness that cut my heart, "I'd rather dance with my boss." The music playing in the background became just a distant hum while my chest burned as if each word she said was a knife stuck in my soul. I could no longer see anyone around me, only her smile for him, the way her eyes sparkled for another man who wasn't me. As she twirled in his arms, each step seemed to crush the memories of all the birthdays, dinners, and promises exchanged, everything crumbling as if our story had never existed. I walked out of that party like a ghost, without feeling the ground, and the night wind only further chilled the hole that had opened in the middle of my chest. Where did I go wrong? Why wasn't I enough? With every step I took through the dark streets, her voice echoed in my mind, the sound of her laughter mixed with the sound of the music, as if life was mocking me at that moment when my world was falling apart. I spent sleepless nights trying to understand when she stopped loving me, when she decided to give her heart to someone else, when I stopped being man enough for her. I turned over every memory like someone looking for a lost key, trying to find the loophole that allowed him to enter our lives. I remembered the day we met, the afternoons we spent in bed planning our future, the plans to have children and grow old together, all thrown away by a moment of ego and desire. As the hours passed in the solitude of my apartment, I got up and walked through the empty rooms, touching the photographs hanging on the wall, our smiles frozen in moments that would never return. My hands trembled and my knees threatened to give way as the longing for her mixed with the hatred of having been deceived. With each good memory came a bitter taste, as if each "I love you" had been said only to mask the betrayal that was growing in her heart. My mind would sink into imaginary dialogues, where I would confront her and ask, "Why did you do this to me? Why did you destroy everything we built together?" But in each fantasy she would just look away, smiling sideways as if my pain was insignificant compared to the pleasure she found in someone else. I remember the sound of her voice at the party, harsh and cutting, "You don't understand, I need someone who will make me feel alive again," and that sounded like a death sentence to everything I believed was real between us. In the following days, the messages I sent went unanswered, and the phone calls became echoes of my despair, while her coldness pushed me even deeper into a bottomless pit. In the midst of my downfall, something inside me lit up like an ember about to become a flame. With each tear, I felt more anger and more strength to understand that it was not I who should sink into regret, but rather she who needed to face the choice she made. It was then, in a silent dawn, while the world slept, that I realized, she was the one who betrayed, she was the one who destroyed, she was the one who threw away what we had, and there was nothing I could have done to stop someone who had already decided to turn their back on everything we had lived. The realization that I was not to blame began to change my view of pain, transforming suffering into fuel to get back up, to start over without her presence constantly reminding me of what I was forced to lose. It was at that moment that I understood that forgiving didn't mean accepting back the person who stabbed me, but rather freeing myself from the weight I carried in my chest. As I started to go out again, to smile again and to realize that the world still had colors that I hadn't seen in a long time, her shadow lingered in my memory like a bitter reminder of everything I no longer wanted to experience. I began to look at each person more carefully, but also with more courage, because I discovered that those who truly love don't need to beg to be chosen. As the months went by, I heard that she wasn't finding the same happiness that we once said we had together, that her days had turned gray and her nights empty like the ones I had spent in the beginning. She began to search in each face for the reflection of something she had lost forever, a sincere, loyal love that she would never find again. One rainy day, when life had already started to make sense to me again, I heard hesitant knocks on my door. It was as if each sound echoed in the walls of my heart, bringing back the voice I had buried. When I opened it, there she was, so different from the woman who had abandoned me at that party. Her eyes, which had previously shone with pride and contempt, were now dull and pleading, and the voice that said, "I was wrong, forgive me," sounded empty and belated. I watched her in silence, remembering every sleepless night, every swallowed tear, every time I felt inadequate because of her. At that moment, I knew that there was nothing left that could unite us, because I had been reborn from the ashes she left behind, and there was no room to revive what had been killed by her choice. She begged me, tried to hug me, said that no one had ever loved her like I did, that she had sought in other arms the flame that she had only found with me, but I no longer needed that validation. I realized that it wasn't love that brought her back, but rather the desperation of someone who reaps what they sow. So, I took a deep breath, pushed her hands away from my chest and calmly replied that her life was now a reflection of her decisions, and that I would move on without carrying the weight of those who didn't value me. As she fell to her knees at my door, I realized that the greatest revenge was not to yell or humiliate her, but to show her that I was able to start over without needing her. And it was there, standing in front of her, that I realized the power of forgiveness, not to give a second chance to the person who betrayed me, but to free myself once and for all from the past. But what really happened that night when she knocked on my door? What did I say to her when our eyes finally met after so long? And how did each word we exchanged seal the fate of the one who once promised to love me forever? Welcome to the channel where cheating will never be romanticized or encouraged. Here, our stories are completely fictional, created to show how cheating corrodes hearts and destroys lives. Our goal is to remind people that cheating is not worth it, and those who choose this path pay a high price. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is an intense and shocking story. Enjoy. Jason had always been the kind of man who inspired confidence with just a look. His tall, discreet presence, combined with a gentle smile and a balanced sense of humor, made him a husband that many would envy and few would dare challenge. He worked as a financial manager in a medium-sized company, dedicated, punctual, someone who took pride in delivering on his promises. His days began early, with the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the kitchen illuminated by the soft morning light. Every workday, he left the house not without first leaving a loving kiss on the forehead of his wife, Laura, whom he loved with all his heart. Weekends were reserved for rest, but mainly for sharing simple moments, shopping at the market, walks at dusk, movies accompanied by cheap wine and conversations that ranged from routine to distant dreams about trips they would still take together. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by trees and with wide sidewalks that invited couples to stroll hand in hand, and there, Jason and Laura built a home that seemed stormproof. Laura, on the other hand, was always the woman who lit up any room she entered. With a sweet demeanor and a calm way of speaking, she had the gift of making people feel special, but she also hid an intensity in her gaze that few could decipher. She had been passionate about dancing since she was a teenager, and was proud to have taken classes that made her feel alive, light, as if music could transform her into another person. When she met Jason, she was enchanted by his patience and sincerity, qualities she had never found in any of the boys who had come into her life. Together, they believed they could overcome any obstacle, and for years, this belief was confirmed in every challenge: the rent that was more than they could afford at the beginning of their marriage, the purchase of a used car that seemed impossible, the medical bills after Laura's minor accident, all of which were overcome with companionship and the faith that, together, they could endure any pain. Their routine was balanced between work and small gestures of affection. Jason would bring her flowers on Fridays, a habit he had cultivated since the first year of their marriage, and Laura would prepare his favorite dish on special occasions, as a way of reminding him how much she loved him. They had friends in common, some couples who admired their relationship and who often complimented them at dinners and gatherings. "You were made for each other," they would say, and both would smile without hesitation, certain that this was the purest truth. When they argued, it was always over small things, like the mess of clothes left around the room or the way Jason forgot to turn off the lights. But these disagreements would quickly end with a hug and a sincere apology. There was a respect between them that seemed unbreakable, a trust built with each night they spent together, sharing secrets and silences that only made sense to those who truly loved each other. At work, Jason was admired by his colleagues and considered a role model by his subordinates. His direct boss recognized in him a unique ability to keep the team united and motivated, even during the most difficult months for the company. Laura, who worked as an administrative coordinator at a dance school, was overflowing with passion for the artistic environment that surrounded her. She arrived early, set up the classrooms for classes, and talked to parents and teachers with the lightheartedness of someone who believes in the transformative power of art. Despite their busy schedules, they made a point of setting aside one day a month for dinners out, when they would turn off their cell phones and focus on each other, as if the world stopped for a few hours just for them. On those nights, they would exchange confidences, make plans, and laugh like two young people who were still discovering life, even after more than 10 years together. That year, things seemed to have taken a particularly positive turn for both of them. Jason was invited to participate in an important project that could pave the way for a promotion, and Laura began to receive recognition for the events she organized at school, including festivals that attracted families from all over the region. They supported each other, exchanging proud glances and sending encouraging messages throughout the day, as if they knew that one's success was also the other's victory. On Sundays, they liked to wake up late, make pancakes together and watch travel shows, dreaming of visiting faraway places when their finances finally allowed. It was in this setting that the security of their love for each other seemed unshakable, like a wall built over years of affection, trust and mutual dedication. But even in the most serene calm, winds can blow without warning. When they received the invitation to Jason's company party, they were both excited, as it would be the first time in months that they would be able to enjoy themselves together at an elegant event. Laura spent the week planning her dress, choosing shoes that matched the sober tone of her husband's suit, and Jason worked hard to finalize reports and clear his schedule, ensuring that nothing would interfere with the night they had been looking forward to. They prepared with enthusiasm. Laura put on her makeup with care, put on her favorite perfume and walked down the stairs smiling, finding Jason at the foot of the stairs, where he was waiting for her with his jaw dropped, enchanted by the woman he had chosen to share his life with. The walk to the party venue was filled with lively conversations, memories of other events, intertwined hands, and laughter that echoed along the silent avenue at night. Upon arrival, they were warmly welcomed by Jason's colleagues, who praised Laura's beauty and elegance, highlighting what an inspiring couple they made. The room was lit by imposing chandeliers and decorated with white flower arrangements, while a string quartet filled the room with classical music that made the atmosphere seem like something out of a fairy tale. They walked between tables, chatted with other couples, sipped champagne and exchanged knowing glances that confirmed how proud they felt of each other. Jason, always attentive, introduced Laura to colleagues who had not yet met her as, "my wonderful wife," while she smiled sweetly and held his hand tightly, as if silently saying that she was happy to share that evening with him. During the night, Laura danced with Jason to a few slow songs, their hands intertwined and their bodies close, and anyone who watched them could see the harmony between them. At times, their faces would get close enough for them to exchange whispers that made their smiles grow wider. But, amidst this lightness, there was something new in the way Laura behaved when they were not together. Sometimes, her gaze seemed to search for something in the distance, as if she lost focus for a few seconds before returning to smile at Jason. He didn't notice right away, enchanted by the beauty of the night, but a few people noticed her restlessness. However, no one dared to comment, because the respect the couple inspired was greater than any rumor that could arise from a passing impression. As the hours passed, the party atmosphere became more relaxed, the music picked up pace, and people spread out across the dance floor, the sofas in the ballroom, and the hallways that led to the garden illuminated by yellow lights. Jason stepped away a few times to talk to colleagues about the project he was leading, proud of every word he said about his work. Meanwhile, Laura interacted with her colleagues' wives, talked about trips she dreamed of taking, and even exchanged tips on clothes and makeup. When they met again, they exchanged quick kisses and caresses that made it seem like nothing could shake their harmony. Even so, there was something subtle, almost imperceptible, that began to infiltrate the air between them, like a thin mist that goes unnoticed but gradually blurs vision. That night, the details made all the difference: the waiter who complimented Laura's friendliness, the music that brought back memories of their first meeting, the toast they made while looking into each other's eyes, silently promising more years of complicity. Every little gesture seemed to reinforce the idea that they were exactly where they were supposed to be, living the perfect moment they so deserved after months of hard work. The room vibrated with the sound of conversation, laughter, the hurried footsteps of waiters balancing trays, and the orchestra that alternated with more modern music, adapting to the taste of the audience. Everything conspired to make the night one of the most special they had ever experienced. As dawn approached, some guests were already leaving, saying goodbye with warm hugs. Jason and Laura were still there, enjoying every moment of that event that symbolized, for them, the celebration of their achievements as a couple. At certain moments, they exchanged glances that mixed tiredness and satisfaction, as if they knew that this party marked the beginning of a new phase in their lives, full of plans, achievements and, who knows, the trips they had dreamed of. Laura rested her head on Jason's shoulder between dances, while he gently caressed her back, conveying a seemingly inexhaustible affection. For those watching from afar, they were the portrait of happiness, of companionship that survives time and difficulties. But deep down, there was something that Laura couldn't completely shake from her heart, a silent conflict that made her take a deep breath between dances, that made her grip her champagne glass tighter than usual, that made her smile slightly restrained at certain moments. Still, for everyone there, Jason and Laura were an example of love and partnership, and no one imagined that, behind seemingly perfect gestures, there were secrets hidden that could change everything they had built. The party continued, the last chords echoed through the hall, and the future that seemed so promising still stood before them like an illuminated castle, but that could, at any moment, reveal cracks that no one would ever imagine finding. The week that followed the party was marked by a different silence inside the house, not the comfortable silence they usually shared when they read side by side or simply watched the rain through the window, but a heavy, almost palpable silence that seemed to grow with each dawn. Jason woke up first, as always, but instead of feeling the warmth of Laura still asleep next to him, he ran his hand over the cold, empty sheet, as she had started getting up earlier, claiming commitments at dance school that never existed before. During coffee, the conversations that had previously been filled with plans and jokes became monosyllabic, and her eyes always seemed to be focused on something that was not present in that bright kitchen. Jason tried to fill the void by bringing up topics about renovations they could do on the house or about trips they dreamed of, but each sentence he made was met with dry answers, forced smiles that did not reach her eyes. The atmosphere between them became denser each day, as if an invisible veil separated their bodies at the same table, on the same sofa, in the same bed. In the early days, Jason couldn't understand what was happening, but he clung to the idea that it was all just accumulated stress. He tried to convince himself that Laura was just tired from her classes and the festivals she organized. Still, his mind, restless on sleepless nights, began to remember those seconds when he saw her distracted at the party, the sparkle in her eyes when she danced with someone else while he chatted with his colleagues. The feeling of insecurity that had arisen there grew like a poisonous root, taking over his thoughts. He started to come home early, hoping to surprise her with flowers or with dinner ready, but on several of those occasions, he found the house empty or heard excuses about meetings that went on longer than planned. Her perfume seemed different when she arrived, stronger, as if she was trying to mask something, and the kisses that had previously been given passionately became just quick, distant brushes of lips. Laura, in turn, felt torn between the world she had built with Jason and the feeling of newness she had found in another embrace. Every time she was away from him, she convinced herself that she just needed time to sort out her feelings, but the messages exchanged with someone who had started to take up more space in her mind made her long for moments away from home. She would even invent work meetings just to justify her absence. She would go out looking better than ever and check her cell phone with an anxiety that made her completely forget about her husband who was waiting for her. Her heart struggled between the guilt that consumed her in the early hours of the morning, when she would look at Jason sleeping with a serene expression, and the excitement that took over her when she received each message from someone who promised to rekindle the flame that she said was extinguished. Little by little, she began to realize that she could no longer hide the smiles that escaped when her cell phone vibrated, nor control the change in her tone of voice when Jason asked about her day. As the atmosphere at home deteriorated, Jason's workload grew more intense. The responsibilities of the potentially career-changing project forced him to attend meetings that ended late and left him exhausted. Even so, he made a point of calling Laura every night while she was still at the office, asking if she needed him to bring her anything or if she wanted to join him for dinner. But their conversations became short, interrupted by excuses about being tired or having commitments. In the few moments they did have together, Jason tried to keep his smile on his face, to compliment her as he always did, but Laura seemed increasingly distant, as if every word he said echoed in an empty hallway. When they slept, their bodies only touched by accident, and the dreams they shared became memories that hurt more than any misspoken word. At the dance school, Laura found refuge. There, she felt desired, special, alive in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. The attention she received made her heart race, and with each meeting, each conversation in a more intimate tone, she allowed herself to believe that she deserved to feel that way again, that she was just looking for the happiness she said she had lost at home. She began to extend classes, invent meetings and answer messages that arrived at increasingly suspicious times, hiding her cell phone as if it were a forbidden relic. Some days, when she returned home, her eyes carried a flame that did not match the stories she told about the exhaustion of work. Jason, increasingly confused, began to notice details that he had previously ignored: her inconsistent schedules, the way she dressed to go out, the subtle changes in her mood, and even the perfume she had started to wear, sweeter, more intense, more seductive. As the weeks went by, Jason began to lose his peace. Nights that were once restful turned into endless hours of torturing thoughts. He would get up in silence to walk around the house, looking at the photos that decorated the walls, searching in the smiles of the past for some clue that would explain what was happening. Sometimes, he would even pick up her cell phone while Laura was taking a shower, but he would only find deleted conversations or apps locked with passwords that never needed to exist between them. The atmosphere between them became increasingly heavy, and the silence was now not only uncomfortable, it was suffocating. The words of affection they exchanged became mechanical, and the looks that used to say, "I love you," began to avoid each other as if afraid of what they might find deep inside the other. Amidst this spiral of uncertainty, Jason's best friend's birthday party arrived, an event they had both promised to attend. It was an opportunity he saw as a chance to rescue something, to rekindle the connection that seemed to have been lost amid so many missed encounters. Jason prepared himself carefully, chose an outfit she always said she loved, bought flowers to give her before they left, and reserved a table at their favorite restaurant for after the party. But Laura seemed anxious, uncomfortable, as if she wanted the night to end before it even began. During the party, Jason tried to approach her friends, to start a conversation, but he noticed that she smiled more at her cell phone than at anyone else present. With each notification, she hid it, but her uneasiness was evident. When asked by friends about how the wedding was going, Jason forced a smile, but his hands were sweating cold and his heart was beating as if it wanted to escape his chest. The night went on with conversations that seemed empty and dances that became rare. When the band started playing a slow song, Jason reached out to Laura, seeking the simple gesture that had brought them together so many times, but he was surprised by an impatient look that hit him like a punch. She looked away, took a deep breath and, in a tone that was a mix of irritation and coldness, declined the invitation, saying that she was tired. Jason felt the pain rise in his throat, but he swallowed the bitter words that wanted to escape, convincing himself that it was not the time to express his anguish. He tried to smile, but the smile died before it even reached his lips. Laura, noticing his sadness, just looked away, busying herself with answering messages that seemed more important than any words Jason could say. Hours later, the party ended, and silence filled the car as they drove home. Jason gripped the steering wheel as if his mental stability depended on it, while Laura kept her eyes fixed on the darkness of the road, crossing her arms as if building a wall around her own heart. When they arrived, Jason tried one last gesture, inviting her to have a glass of wine and talk, but she declined with an impatient sigh, going up the stairs without looking back. That night marked the beginning of what would become unbearable. In the following days, her distance became more evident, his calls were ignored, his messages took hours to be answered, and when he returned home, he found Laura increasingly distant, with the tired look of someone who seemed to live in another world. Until, on a night that began like so many others, Jason decided to pick her up by surprise at the dance school, eager to take her to dinner and try, once again, to rescue what seemed to be slipping through his fingers. When he arrived, he parked the car in front of the building and waited for a few minutes. But when the back door opened, he saw Laura come out accompanied by another man, smiling like she hadn't smiled in months, with a lightness that he no longer recognized in her. Jason's world shattered in that moment. Every good memory turned into rubble, and the trust that he carried as the foundation of his marriage crumbled before the kiss he witnessed, a kiss that wasn't his, but from someone who should never have been there. He didn't scream, he didn't get out of the car, he just watched in silence, feeling every heartbeat hurt as if it were tearing his soul apart. When they walked away, Jason stood there, motionless, staring into the night that had suddenly become colder and darker, feeling that everything he had taken for granted was nothing more than an illusion about to reveal even more devastating secrets. Jason spent days wandering around the house as if he were a stranger in his own home, touching the walls, arranging misplaced pillows, walking through silent hallways that seemed more like tunnels of memories. Each object reminded him of moments that seemed like they were from another life, the photo of them smiling on the beach, the painting they bought together to decorate the living room, the loving notes they used to exchange and now lay dusty inside a drawer he didn't have the courage to open. As anguish took over every fiber of his body, Jason decided he needed to confront Laura, to know the whole truth without beating around the bush, because living in uncertainty was more painful than facing whatever reality was hidden behind the glances she averted. When he got home that night, he found her sitting on the couch, fiddling with her cell phone with a distant expression. The tension was so thick it seemed impossible to breathe. He dropped his keys on the table with force, making a dry sound echo through the room. Laura slowly looked up, and in that brief contact, Jason knew that this conversation would change their lives forever. He walked toward her with determined steps, stopping so close that she could smell the sweet perfume that had sickened him since he had come to associate it with betrayal. His voice was low but firm, almost like a contained roar, "I saw you. I saw you together." The silence that followed was so deep that they could both hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Laura clutched her cell phone to her chest, as if to protect herself from the words they knew would come next. Her eyes began to water, but Jason didn't look away, standing up straight as if his entire body were supported only by the anger boiling in his veins. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, only a contained sob that made her tremble. "Are you going to keep lying or are you going to tell me the truth?" he continued, his voice now louder, filled with pain and an indignation that made her hands clench into fists. Laura stood up slowly, running her trembling hands through her hair, and began to pace back and forth, as if trying to find courage in her own footsteps. Finally, in a barely audible whisper, she said that it had just been a mistake, that she was confused, that their love was not over. But Jason interrupted with a bitter laugh, a hoarse sound that sounded more like a pent-up scream, "Don't lie to me anymore. Tell me everything. Now." She took a deep breath, wiped away the tears that were beginning to flow, and the confession he would never have imagined fell like a bolt of lightning into his already shattered mind. Laura revealed that during the company party, that very night when he had asked her to dance and been coldly rejected, it was not only the beginning of the end, it was also the beginning of something she had been secretly nurturing for months. The man she had seen her with was not just a recent lover, but someone she had been in a relationship with for much longer than he had suspected. Amidst her words, each sentence sounded like knives being stabbed one after the other, but the worst came when Laura revealed the secret she had kept with all her strength. That night, when she said she preferred to dance with her boss, she had not only chosen another man, but she had done so knowing exactly who he was to Jason. Her lover was Jason's own mentor at the company, the man who had helped him get opportunities, who had visited his house, dined at the same table, laughed at their jokes and patted him on the shoulder so many times with empty compliments. The boss who had always been treated as a close friend was the same one who shared Laura's bed in secret, while Jason trusted them both blindly. When he heard that, his legs gave out and he fell onto the couch, the world spinning as if everything around him had been ripped out of place. His heart was beating wildly, it hurt, it burned, and the image of the man he admired now mixed with the memories of the kisses he had seen exchanged in the dark parking lot. Laura tried to get closer, she reached out to him while she cried desperately, saying that it all started as an impulse, that she felt alone while Jason was immersed in work, that she needed attention. But with each word she said, her voice sounded more distant to him, as if she were speaking from inside a dark tunnel. Jason remembered the conversations with his boss, the advice he had received, the times the man had told him that Laura was wonderful and that he was lucky. Each memory now seemed like a piece of a cruel game, fitted together to make him believe a perfect lie. His mind turned over the details, the work dinners where Laura insisted on accompanying him, the looks they exchanged and that he, naively, interpreted as simple sympathy between friends. Now, the whole story made sense like a macabre puzzle that was being put together before his eyes, revealing the image of a nightmare. Laura's cries grew louder, but Jason heard nothing but the sound of his own blood pounding in his ears, like war drums. He jumped to his feet, his eyes red with rage, and shouted that he needed her to leave the house immediately, that he couldn't bear to look at her without feeling disgusted, that every corner of that house was permeated with lies. She begged him, fell to her knees, hugged his legs, said between sobs that she loved him, that it was all a mistake, that she just wanted to feel alive, that he was an incredible man, but that she had lost herself. Jason closed his eyes and tried to block out the sound of her voice, but the words stabbed into his mind like knives. "You destroyed everything, Laura." "Everything," he said with a cold calm that made her body shiver. "You not only betrayed me, but you betrayed the man I was, you killed our story." At that moment, Laura, in tears and despair, revealed another detail that cut even deeper. Her boss had promised her that he would leave her and that together they could live a free love, without secrets, without needing to lie anymore. He promised her better positions, trips, a life of luxury that seduced her. And when Jason started working late to secure the promotion he dreamed of, that was exactly what they expected, that he would stay busy enough so that they could live their affair without risks. With each word, Jason's throat closed and he had to fight to breathe, as the memories came like violent waves. Nights when he arrived tired and found her smiling on her cell phone, days when she said she was too tired to talk, moments when he believed that her absences were just tiredness. He walked away from her, picked up his coat thrown on the sofa and, with quick, heavy steps, left the house, letting the door slam behind him. The cold night air hit him like a punch, but it was better than breathing the same air as her. He walked aimlessly through the dark streets, feeling the city quieter than ever. The streetlights created shadows that danced on the walls and sidewalks, and every corner seemed to whisper that he had been deceived, betrayed, manipulated by the one he loved most. When he stopped in front of a closed store, he leaned against the wall and slid down until he sat on the floor, hiding his face in his hands, crying for the first time in years as if emptying all the pain he had accumulated. The tears ran hot and silent, taking away the image of the woman he loved and the friend he admired. As the early morning wind blew past his back, Jason realized that nothing would ever be the same again. There was no apology that could erase the double betrayal, no promise that could restore the shattered trust. He felt cheated, humiliated, but also strangely clearer than he had ever been. He knew that this revelation was not only the end of a marriage, but also the end of the man who had once blindly trusted everyone around him. And, amid the bitter taste of tears, something began to grow, a dark determination, a will to rebuild himself and to show himself that, even shattered, he could still be reborn. But before that, he would have to face the consequences that would come with exposing that secret, because the truth had been released, and it was about to take its toll on everyone involved. Jason sat there on the floor for minutes that felt like hours, staring at the empty sidewalk in front of him as he felt the crushing weight of what he had just discovered. When his mind finally emerged from its stupor, he staggered to his feet, searching the cold night for some meaning in what was left of his life. His steps took him to a simple, discreet hotel on the other side of town, a place he had never imagined he needed, but which now represented the only distance he could put between himself and the house that no longer felt like home. The receptionist, noticing Jason's devastated expression, handed him the room keys without asking questions. Inside the room, the muffled sound of night traffic mixed with the rapid beating of his heart as he sat on the edge of the bed and, for the first time, he was able to think clearly about the last few months, every small change in Laura's behavior, every smile that was no longer meant for him, every hug that felt empty, and every apology that he had once accepted out of love but now saw as carefully crafted lies. The next morning, Jason woke up without having really slept, his face marked by hours of suppressed crying. The sun flooded the room with cruel brightness, exposing the mess of his emotions. He forced himself to get up, put on the same wrinkled clothes from the night before and go out to face what needed to be done. He knew he couldn't hide forever. He stopped at a cafe, bought a strong espresso and sat at a secluded table, staring at his cell phone screen. With trembling fingers, he wrote a short message to Laura, "We need to talk today. Meet me at our cafe at 6 p.m. He knew it would be their last meeting, that from then on he would have to chart his own course, but he needed to hear from her one more time, needed confirmation that the woman he had shared years of his life with had truly chosen to destroy him. Late in the afternoon, she arrived at the coffee shop before the agreed time, sat at the same table where they had laughed together so many times and planned the future, and waited amid the familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee that now seemed sour. Laura arrived punctually, her face tired and haggard, her eyes puffy as if she hadn't slept either. When she sat down, Jason remained silent, just staring at her with a cold serenity that made her shiver. The waiter approached, but they both refused to take any orders. The silence between them was so thick that it even attracted curious glances from the other tables. Finally, Jason broke the silence with a low but cutting voice, "You knew what he meant to me. You knew." The words were not meant as a question, but as an acknowledgement, a direct blow to her conscience. Laura closed her eyes tightly, took a deep breath and, through tears that refused to fall, began to talk about the beginning of everything, about how her boss had started to praise her, how he made her feel wanted and alive again when he said that Jason no longer saw her. With each sentence she said, Jason kept his expression still, but inside he felt a mixture of anger and emptiness that made him wish he didn't have to hear anything else. He interrupted with a trembling but firm voice, "Don't try to justify what you did. Just tell me why you chose to continue. Why didn't you leave before you destroyed me?" Laura brought her hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking as she finally confessed that she was afraid of giving up everything, afraid of losing the comfort, the image of the perfect wife they had built together, afraid of being alone and having to face the weight of her own choices. Each word she said sounded more like cowardice than regret. Jason shook his head, his voice almost hoarse as he said that he would never trust her again, that he could never forgive the coldness of the person who had turned their home into a stage for lies. The people around them tried to pretend they didn't hear, but the tension emanated from them like a storm ready to explode. Laura, in the midst of convulsive crying, begged for a chance, said that he was still the love of her life, that nothing she had experienced with the other man could compare to what they had together. But Jason raised his hand, asking for silence, and said with terrifying calm that he didn't want to hear anything else, that any words from then on would just be mud trying to cover the ashes of what they had destroyed. He stood up, paid the bill even though he hadn't consumed anything, and left, leaving Laura alone amidst the tables occupied by couples who still seemed to believe in happy endings. Outside, the sky was darkening with heavy clouds, as if the entire city reflected the whirlwind that was forming inside him. Jason walked along the sidewalks wet from the drizzle that was beginning to fall, remembering how he had dreamed of that woman by his side until the last day of his life, how he had believed in every promise whispered in her ear. Still confused, he picked up his cell phone and called the lawyer who was with him at work, someone he trusted as the last pillar of his shattered life. He explained in a few words what had happened, the betrayal, the manipulation, and the relationship Laura had with her boss. On the other end of the line, the lawyer sighed heavily and said that this changed everything, that he needed to act quickly, because his boss might try to retaliate to protect his own image in the company. Jason agreed, setting up a meeting for the next morning. He hung up and realized that the world would not stop for him to heal his wounds, that he needed to make immediate decisions if he wanted to maintain a minimum of dignity. He walked to a more comfortable hotel, because he knew that the next few days would be a battle not only against suffering, but also against trying to preserve his own interests. The next morning, when he arrived at the lawyer's office, Jason was greeted with looks of respect and concern. As he recounted every detail, every suspicious little gesture, every conversation that now made sense under the harsh light of truth, he realized that exposing the pain was almost as unbearable as feeling it. The lawyer advised him on how to document the betrayal, explained the legal options he had to protect his assets, his career, and even his mental health. Jason listened to everything in silence, just shaking his head as each explanation hurt as if it were tearing a little more of his soul. In the end, when the lawyer asked if he was ready to start the separation process, Jason took a deep breath and said yes, that he needed to close that chapter so he could start over, even if he didn't yet know how to put the pieces back together. Meanwhile, Laura, at home, was living her own hell. Every corner of the house echoed the emptiness left by Jason, the silence was deafening and the memories of happy times haunted her like ghosts. She tried to call him dozens of times, but all the calls went straight to voicemail. She sent messages begging for a chance, saying she would do anything to make amends, but received no response. Desperate, she began looking for him in places they frequented together, went to the office, tried to contact mutual friends, but they all said they didn't know where he was, and even if they did, they wouldn't help her. The isolation she felt was more painful than any punishment she could imagine. Her lover, on the other hand, began to avoid her, afraid that the scandal would harm his position, making it clear that the promises of a future made in the heat of passion were nothing more than empty words to seduce her. At the same time, Jason began to focus on reorganizing his own life, looking for small apartments to rent, thinking about moving to another neighborhood, another environment, another universe that didn't carry memories of her around every corner. He began to meet up with friends he had left behind during his marriage, slowly regaining the feeling that there could still be happiness away from Laura. In these encounters, he only shared fragments of what had happened, because the shame of having been betrayed so deeply still weighed more heavily than the desire to vent. Little by little, however, he realized that smiling was no longer impossible and that each laugh, however brief, was like a breath of life that entered his devastated chest. On the night that marked exactly 1 month since the revelation, Laura appeared in front of Jason's new apartment, knocking insistently on the door as the rain fell heavily, sticking her hair to her pale face, disfigured by anguish. He opened the door just enough for their eyes to meet, but he kept the chain attached. She begged him, said that she had lived through the worst days of her life, that she now understood everything she had lost, that nothing in the world could replace the love they had built together. Jason took a deep breath, smelling the rain mixed with the perfume that still brought painful memories. In a low but firm voice, he said that every choice has a price, and that now she had to live with hers, because he was determined to move on without her. His words made Laura fall to her knees, sobbing loudly, but Jason remained impassive, closing the door slowly as he felt, for the first time in a long time, that he had regained control over his own destiny. He leaned against the closed door, listening to Laura's muffled screams mixed with the sound of the storm, but he felt no relief or satisfaction, only a deep silence that, despite hurting, seemed to make room for reconstruction. He knew that the road ahead would be long and full of scars, but also that, from then on, each step would be taken by him and for him. And, as the streetlights flickered reflecting the puddles formed by the rain, Jason allowed himself, for the first time in a long time, to dream of a future in which he would not have to carry the weight of lies that were not his, a future in which he could learn to love again, but above all, to love himself above any promises. In the days that followed that last conversation filled with tears and rain, Jason began to wake up every morning to a different silence, a silence that was no longer so heavy, but rather full of possibilities, as if each ray of sunlight that passed through the curtains of his new apartment illuminated not only the room, but also the wounds that were healing in his heart. He resumed routines that he had abandoned years ago. He went back to running at dawn through the empty streets, feeling the cold wind on his face as a reminder that he was alive. He signed up for cooking classes that he had always wanted to take but had put off to prioritize commitments that he now recognized as part of a past that no longer belonged to him. Each step he took, each new experience he allowed himself to live, worked as an antidote to the pain that still throbbed in his chest, but that, slowly, began to transform into learning. While Jason was rebuilding his life, Laura was drowning in regret. She spent her nights awake, replaying in her mind the last image she had of Jason, his firm, serene gaze as he closed the door, a serenity that terrified her, because it showed that he really wouldn't come back. Her days became repetitive, marked by the loneliness that echoed through the rooms of the empty house, by the dishes she prepared only for herself, by the memories that appeared in every corner, like ghosts that made her want to scream. Her lover, in turn, proved to be as cowardly as he was predictable, breaking off contact as soon as the risk of scandal became real. For him, Laura had been nothing more than a convenient pastime, an exciting escape that lost its charm the moment the consequences began to appear like inevitable waves. Feeling used and discarded, she finally understood that there was no future outside of the love she had destroyed. At the same time, Jason was surprised by the support from people he thought were distant. Friends he had distanced himself from when he prioritized marriage showed up with messages, invitations to go out, and friendly shoulders that didn't judge, just listened. In long, sincere conversations, he expressed his doubts, shared his fears, and discovered that there was more understanding and solidarity around him than he had ever imagined. He began attending weekly meetings with a running group, where each kilometer covered in the company of strangers who became friends served as a perfect metaphor for rebuilding himself. With each step, with each casual conversation under the early evening sky, he felt freer of the weight he carried on his chest. But at the same time, amidst his attempts to get back on his feet, he couldn't help but wonder if, at some point, he would forgive, not for Laura, but for himself, so that he wouldn't spend the rest of his life held hostage by a resentment that was slowly eroding any possibility of happiness. The nights were still the worst. There were times when Jason would find himself staring at the dark ceiling, remembering the lazy Sundays when he and Laura would make plans to grow old together, or the afternoons when they would prepare new recipes, laughing when something went wrong. At those times, longing would mix with anger, creating a knot that was hard to untie in his chest. It was in this tangle of emotions that he began to see a bigger dilemma: to what extent was it worth keeping the hatred alive, if he himself was the one suffering the most from it? And what if, deep down, forgiving simply meant accepting that not all love lasts forever, but that each person can learn from their losses to love themselves better? These reflections accompanied him in his moments of solitude, leaving him restless, but also fueling a maturity that arose from the ashes themselves. Laura, on the other hand, began to live between desperate attempts to contact her and long periods of silence. She sent messages that went unanswered, letters that never received a reply, and sometimes she would just call to hear Jason's voice on the answering machine, as if that would remind her that he still existed, even if unreachable. She even sought out his family, begging for a chance to be heard, but found only closed doors and looks of contempt. Mutual friends, who had previously admired their relationship, now avoided her, and some did not even hide their indignation. Loneliness grew like a stain, swallowing any shred of hope she still had of rebuilding what she had broken. In moments of greater despair, she would call the lover who had once promised her the world, but he treated her coldly, reminding her that the bond between them had been nothing more than a dangerous game. While Laura was facing social ostracism, Jason began to visit places that had marked his life before marriage. He went to the house where he grew up, had long conversations with his mother, who showed him old photos and recalled stories that made him smile for the first time in weeks without feeling guilty about it. He also went back to the small bookstore where he had spent hours before meeting Laura, sitting in an armchair in the corner to read slowly, absorbing each page as if rediscovering pleasures he had forgotten. In these forays into the past, Jason realized that he had been happy even before she was, and that he could be happy again, albeit in a different way. Each small victory, a night of sleep without nightmares, a lunch where the food tasted good, a conversation that provoked laughter, became proof that life still had room for new beginnings. The divorce process moved forward slowly, with meetings at the lawyer's office where documents were reviewed in tense silence. When they needed to see each other, Jason and Laura avoided any contact beyond what was necessary. She would arrive with her head down, her voice breaking when she had to answer a question. He remained distant, but not aggressive, as if he had finally understood that the path to his own freedom did not lie in revenge, but in the courage to move forward. In one of these meetings, while they waited for the lawyer to pick up a document, Laura risked asking if there was any chance, if there was anything she could do to repair the pain she had caused. Jason looked up, looked into hers for a long moment, and calmly said that it was no longer about chances, but about choices, and that hers had sealed their fates. The signing of the agreement represented the point of no return, but also the liberation. As he left the registry office, Jason felt the late afternoon breeze blow on his face as if it were taking away some of the weight that had been with him. He walked through the streets without any clear direction, but this time not because he was lost, but because each step seemed to reaffirm his independence. He found a coffee shop where he decided to go in to celebrate in silence, ordering a strong coffee and sitting at a table near the window, watching the people who went about their lives at a hurried pace. He smiled slightly as he realized that, despite everything, the world kept turning, and that he too could be part of it again, not as half of a broken couple, but as a whole person who had learned, even in the most painful way possible, to prioritize himself. Laura, on the other hand, began attending therapy sessions, pressured by an unbearable feeling of regret. In the first sessions, she could barely speak without crying, but little by little she began to confront her own choices, recognizing the immaturity, neediness and selfishness that made her destroy what she claimed to love the most. At home, every object was a reminder of what she had lost: the mug with their initials on it, the sofa where they spent hours watching movies, the sheets that now felt cold even when the sun shone in the morning. She spent hours replaying conversations she had with Jason, looking for signs of when everything started to go wrong, wishing she could go back in time to make different choices, but being forced to face the reality that the consequences had already become irreversible. In the midst of this reconstruction, Jason found himself in a situation he had never imagined. He began to get closer to a woman he had met in one of his cooking classes. She was also carrying her own pain, coming from a recent divorce, but she had a genuine joy that made him laugh effortlessly. Their conversations flowed naturally, their exchanges of confidences grew deeper without him realizing it, and the lightness he felt in her company contrasted with the weight he had carried for so long. Each encounter, even if it was simple, like walking through the organic market or cooking together, became a small proof that love, when built on respect and sincerity, could be light and restorative. Despite his fear of opening his heart again, Jason began to see her not only as company, but as a reminder that he was still capable of feeling something good for another person. In this rhythm of encounters and discoveries, he realized that he no longer needed Laura's approval, nor explanations that would never be enough. His moral dilemma now revolved around to what extent he could give himself over to a new relationship without carrying the scars as baggage that would prevent him from living fully. He knew that trust would not be rebuilt overnight, but he also understood that he could not allow the pain to shape who he would be from then on. In each conversation with himself, he weighed what he had learned from everything he had experienced: that it is not enough to love, you have to care, but also that the betrayal of the other can never be the fault of the one who truly loves, and that forgiving yourself is as necessary as moving on. Thus, between new experiences and old memories that still surfaced from time to time like shadows in the back of his mind, Jason walked with increasingly firm steps towards a future in which the past would be just a lesson, not a sentence. And as the night sky began to fill with stars above him, he understood that life did not owe him happiness, but that the possibility of achieving it would always be in his hands, as long as he had the courage to start over without looking back. Jason's routine was beginning to take on more defined contours, even though some mornings still carried traces of the pain that insisted on emerging when his mind, betrayed by dreams, took him back to memories he preferred to forget. Little by little, however, the sleepless nights were replaced by more peaceful slumbers, lulled by the good tiredness of days full of activities that he himself chose to live. Cooking classes became his refuge, a space where he felt free to create, to make mistakes, to start over with recipes as a silent metaphor for his own life. The woman he had met there, named Evelyn, became part of his weeks more and more naturally, an invitation to have lunch together after class, another to go to a photography exhibition, until they walked side by side through streets decorated by autumn lights, without rushing, exchanging confidences that made them laugh and, at times, get emotional. During one of these meetings, sitting in a charming café, Evelyn talked about how lost she felt at the end of her marriage, how she feared she would never be able to trust anyone again, and how she felt guilty for having ignored signs that her previous relationship was doomed. Jason listened to her in silence, feeling that those words echoed his own insecurities, but he also realized that, together, they were creating a safe space to open up without fear of judgment. After a long sip from his cup, he shared that, for weeks, he believed he was responsible for being betrayed, as if he could have avoided what happened if he had been more present or more affectionate. Evelyn held his hand gently, looking him in the eyes as she affirmed that the mistake of cheating can never be placed on the one who was betrayed, that this blame does not belong to the one who truly loved. Those words went like balm into wounds that were still healing, bringing an unexpected sense of relief. Over time, Jason and Evelyn began to share more than just dates. They began to exchange messages that went beyond their agreed-upon commitments, confiding in each other about their dreams for the future, and sharing inside jokes that made any gray day seem lighter. Their walks around the city revealed corners that neither of them had known, as if they were rediscovering not only the place where they lived, but also themselves. At every corner, they built new memories, different from the ones Jason had fought so hard to forget. Still, there were times when he hesitated, feeling the urge to protect himself, like when Evelyn approached to hold him tighter or when, at dinner, she said that she felt happy with him. In those moments, Jason had to take a deep breath, reminding himself that allowing himself to love again was not a betrayal of himself, but an act of courage in the face of what he had suffered. Meanwhile, Laura found herself increasingly surrounded by silence. The house that once echoed with laughter and conversation now seemed larger and colder, each sound amplified by hallways that reminded her of the emptiness of the departed. In her therapy sessions, she found it hard to recognize the size of the abyss she had created between her and Jason, but she also understood that she needed to face the consequences so that one day she could forgive herself. Laura's nights became long, filled with thoughts that led her to review every choice, every moment in which she had preferred fleeting excitement to constant love, every lie told with the naturalness of someone who believed she would never be discovered. Regret consumed her like a slow fire, but at the same time, it made her determined not to repeat the same mistakes, even though she knew that this change would not bring Jason back. One Saturday, Jason invited Evelyn to visit his mother's house, which was in a small village on the outskirts of town. The car ride was peaceful, marked by conversations about music, books they both liked, and how they saw life. When they arrived, Jason's mother greeted them with a warm smile, immediately recognizing the different sparkle in her son's eyes, a sparkle she hadn't seen in a long time. Lunch was filled with stories, memories of his childhood, and spontaneous laughter that filled the atmosphere with a long-forgotten lightness. Jason watched Evelyn interact with his mother, noticing how she cared to help, how she listened attentively, and how she got emotional with the memories that came up at the table. At several moments, he caught himself smiling without realizing it, feeling that perhaps this was the first time in a long time that he truly felt at home. After lunch, they walked to the backyard, where Jason was showing Evelyn the swing he had helped his father build when he was a child. Evelyn sat there, swinging gently, looking at the man in front of her with a mixture of affection and respect. In a moment of silence, Jason approached, stopped the swing with his hands, and confessed, in a choked voice, that he was afraid of hurting her, afraid of not being able to be the man she deserved. Evelyn smiled slightly, held his face in her hands, and replied that she was afraid too, but that she was willing to try, because together they had already shown that they knew how to care for each other. Those words became like seeds planted in the fertile soil that Jason was beginning to prepare within himself, nurturing the hope that loving again did not mean repeating the past. In the city, Laura continued to face the stares of those who knew what she had done. In the markets and on the streets, she felt the distrust of those who had previously greeted her with kindness. One morning when she had to go to the bank, she met a longtime friend, who looked at her sadly before asking why she had destroyed something so beautiful. Laura tried to answer, but the words died in her throat, replaced by silent tears that fell as her friend walked away without waiting for an explanation. These encounters reminded her that, even when one wants so much to rebuild, there is damage that cannot be undone, that time does not erase everything, that some wounds leave scars not only on those who suffer, but on everyone who witnesses the pain. Jason, in turn, began to return to old hobbies that he had abandoned, such as photography. He bought a new camera and began to record everyday scenes that would previously have gone unnoticed, a lady smiling at her grandson on a park bench, sunlight reflecting off puddles after rain, a young couple walking hand in hand. In these images, he found beauty in the present, in simplicity, in the moment. When he showed his photos to Evelyn, he felt proud not only of the result, but of the fact that he had once again found something that made him vibrate with joy. On one of these occasions, while they were looking at the photos together, Evelyn commented that she was enchanted by the way he saw the world, how he was able to capture emotions in detail. Jason smiled, touched by her sincerity, and realized that he no longer needed to be defined by a painful past, but rather by who he was becoming. Their relationship grew in trust as they built a routine that combined affection, understanding, and freedom. There was no rush, no demands, just the desire to be together whenever they wanted, respecting the time each needed to heal their own wounds. One late afternoon, sitting on a bench in a nearly deserted square, Jason opened up about everything that had happened to Laura, telling details he had never shared with anyone. Evelyn listened to every word attentively, without interrupting, just holding his hand firmly. When he finished, feeling exhausted, she hugged him, whispering that he was stronger than he imagined, and that she was proud of him for having the courage to face his own pain and still choose to love again. Meanwhile, Laura, even in the midst of her consuming regrets, began to participate in support groups for people who have destroyed relationships through betrayal. Each story she heard in these meetings made her see more clearly the pain she had caused not only Jason, but herself. She discovered that self-deception is one of the greatest enemies of love, and that taking responsibility for one's mistakes is the first step in trying to rebuild one's dignity. Although she never expected forgiveness, she wanted to find peace within herself, to accept that she had made an irreversible mistake, but that she did not need to carry the guilt as an eternal sentence, as long as she truly learned from it. The months went by with Jason and Evelyn exploring the city on nightly walks, cooking together recipes that they tested without fear of making mistakes, reading aloud excerpts from books that inspired them. Each day reinforced the certainty that happiness didn't have to be grandiose, but built on details, on simple gestures, on sincere glances. For Jason, every morning he woke up next to her, he felt that the emptiness left by Laura was replaced by something new, not just a different love, but the feeling of deserving to be truly loved. When Evelyn said that she felt safe by his side, he understood that he had also learned to trust her, that the scars were there, but no longer open, but rather as reminders of everything he had to overcome to get to that point. During meetings with his mother, Jason shared his news, showing photos of the short trips he took with Evelyn, telling stories that made those who, for so long, had only consoled him in silence laugh. His mother, upon seeing her son find joy again, cried with happiness at a dinner, thanking him for not giving up on love. In return, Laura continued trying to regain control of her life, returning to work at the dance school with more dedication than ever, seeking to fill the void that she knew would never be completely erased. Over time, she learned to respect the silence that Jason imposed as the final boundary between them, accepting that, although she still loved him, she could never be part of his future again. With each new morning, Jason found the strength to move forward, no longer as a man scarred by betrayal, but as someone who chose not to let pain define who he would be. And with each goodbye from Evelyn at the end of a meeting, he felt in her embrace the silent promise that, despite their fears, they were building something unique, a story that didn't need to rush to get anywhere, because it was already precious in every moment shared. Spring arrived, painting the streets with shades of green and flowers that burst into bright colors, contrasting with the faded memories of a previous season that still echoed in Jason's mind as a reminder of the darkest winter of his life. But while the world was being renewed, he had also learned to start over. The days were filled with chance encounters that became meaningful, with sincere smiles that Evelyn offered him in every conversation, and with discoveries that made him realize that there was still much to feel, learn, and build. On a clear Saturday, as they walked hand in hand through a craft fair, Evelyn looked at him with eyes shining with serenity and asked if he believed in second beginnings. Jason smiled slightly, squeezing her hand, and replied that he no longer just believed, he lived it every morning when he woke up wanting to live again. Their hearts beat in tune as they watched families walking, children laughing, couples exchanging discreet kisses, and in that simple scene, they both felt certain that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Their relationship matured naturally, without the weight of empty promises, but with the lightness of someone who understands that love doesn't have to be perfect to be true. The exchange of messages that began with good morning and ended with good night became daily rituals, but more than words, they were silent declarations that there was room for trust, care and hope. Jason realized that painful memories no longer paralyzed him, but instead served as reminders that he was capable of rebuilding himself. With each hug, he felt gratitude for having found someone who saw his scars and didn't use them as weapons, but as proof of his courage. In each encounter, Evelyn showed that she also bore her own scars, but that together they could heal what life had hurt, transforming old wounds into shared strength. While Jason found the peace he had sought so much, Laura faced the inevitable outcome of her choices. Each week, she felt the loneliness tighten as if the walls of the house were slowly closing in to suffocate her. She tried for months to resume social life, but everywhere she went she was reminded of what she had done: acquaintances who looked away, friends who stopped responding to messages, relatives who treated her with distance. At dance school, even though she maintained exemplary professionalism, she felt the discomfort of colleagues who knew her story and avoided getting close to her. Some nights, when she got home, she would collapse on the dark couch, staring at the ceiling in search of answers that never came. On one of those nights, alone with her memories, she picked up old wedding photos, reliving each smile that today sounded distant like an echo. She cried silently, understanding that betrayal not only destroys relationships, but also corrupts the soul of the person who commits it, leaving a trail of regret that eats away at the inside. Jason's former boss, a man who believed himself above consequences, faced his own downfall. When rumors of his involvement with Laura reached the board of directors, internal investigations revealed inconsistencies in reports and conflicts of interest that he thought he had hidden well. Little by little, the respect he commanded was replaced by looks of distrust, meetings became interrogations and, in a short time, he was removed from the position that he had used so much to manipulate situations in his favor. Unemployed and with a tarnished reputation, he found himself alone, as everyone who had previously flattered him abandoned him like rats fleeing a drifting ship. The promises of luxury he had made to Laura proved to be empty, just traps to seduce her. In the days that followed, he began receiving calls from creditors, as well as invitations from lawyers to provide clarifications that could lead him to be held legally responsible for some irregular actions committed during his management. The man who once felt untouchable discovered that, in the end, every lie has a high price. On a clear morning, Jason invited Evelyn on a short trip to a nearby village, a place full of peaceful landscapes and welcoming inns. The road was lined with flowery fields, and the breeze that came through the car window took away any trace of bitterness that had once dominated his heart. On the porch of the cottage they rented, they watched the sunset together, and Jason, in a calm voice, confessed that he had never imagined that he would be able to love again in such a calm and true way. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder, moved, whispering that she too felt fear, but that, by his side, she found the courage to move forward. At that moment, they understood that the past did not need to define the future, and that the present, when lived sincerely, was the greatest gift they could give each other. In a symbolic gesture, Jason returned home and, alone, gathered the few things of Laura's that he still had: old letters, birthday presents, photographs that had survived the first cleanings. In a wooded park, he lit a small, controlled fire in a permitted space, and, one by one, he handed over those objects to the flames. As the fire consumed everything, he felt the weight lifting from his shoulders, not with anger, but with the serenity of someone who accepts that some stories need to be closed so that new ones can blossom. It was not destruction, but liberation. At the end, he watched the ashes dance in the wind, mixing with the cold morning air, and smiled as if he understood that, finally, he was free to write the next page of his life. Laura, in another part of the city, woke up every day in the same house that now seemed too big for just one person, with objects and furniture that only echoed memories of moments that would never return. With each photo of happy couples she saw on social media, she felt a pang of regret throb in her chest. When she met people who knew her, she offered a shy smile, but rarely received any sign of sympathy in return. She realized that betrayal not only destroys relationships, but also erodes bonds of friendship, tarnishes reputations, and drives away even the most tolerant. In each attempt to seek company, she found the reflection of her mistakes. In therapy, she finally began to accept that the pain she felt was a direct result of her choices, understanding that regret was just the first step on a long path that she would have to walk alone to rebuild some dignity. Jason and Evelyn continued to strengthen their relationship, discovering simple pleasures like waking up together on days off to cook pancakes, walking through street markets and visiting hidden cafes around the city. In each small gesture, they realized that love is also about complicity, that affection is revealed in daily actions, that trust is built with patience. Although the past still existed as a memory, there was no longer room for it to rule their hearts. On cold nights, they exchanged childhood stories under the covers, and each shared laugh made the present more precious. Jason learned that true love does not need to be made of grandiose promises, but of looks that say more than 1,000 words. Evelyn, on the other hand, felt more alive than ever. Each day with Jason was a reminder that not every disappointment destroys the ability to love forever, that good people exist, and that when two wounded hearts meet, they can heal each other if there is respect, truth, and care. Together, they made travel plans, listed cities they dreamed of visiting, tried different recipes on Saturday nights, transforming small moments into memories that they both knew they would cherish forever. Thus, Jason found not only a new love, but also himself, rediscovering who he was and who he wanted to be. Laura, on the other hand, learned the hard way that cheating not only destroys bonds, but also undoes self-esteem, leaving scars that hurt every time the silence of an empty house becomes deafening. Meanwhile, the former boss, now without prestige or career, faced the result of his opportunism, learning that lies and manipulation are like traps that, sooner or later, catch those who set them. This story shows us that betrayal not only breaks hearts, but also destroys everything that was built with effort, leaving behind a trail of regret that is difficult to repair. If you've made it this far, tell us in the comments what you thought of this story. We want to hear your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this one. Remember, on this channel, we do not support any type of betrayal. We believe that those who cheat destroy not only the other person, but also themselves, losing much more than they can imagine. Cheating is giving up respect, true love, and the chance to build something solid. Always choose loyalty, because true love is born from care and honesty.